I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting conversation tonight and a really interesting guest. Paul Smetanin is my guest tonight. He is the president and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, CANSA, which is home to North America's largest socioeconomic simulation platform. They track 4,000 topics at once for government and market analysis. And he's here to explain why Canada keeps announcing infrastructure, can't see what it spends, and is still living the crisis he warned us about 15 years ago. That sounds like an interesting intro. He's going to talk as well about a couple of other things that I think are really quite interesting. He's going to talk about Ponzi policy. Is that the name?
Ponzinomics.
Ponzinomics, fascinating. And we're going to talk about what he predicted and why we're stuck in a rut. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's nice to be on the show.
So you run and lead a large simulation platform. What is a large simulation platform, sir?
We started off 25 years ago in the country consulting group in economic policy, demographics, healthcare, and things of that nature. In order to understand what tomorrow looks like and what do we have to do today to change it, we have these very large mathematical simulation platforms which help us understand what we should expect and how we might be able to change it. So, yes, we're proudly the largest socioeconomic simulation platform in North America.
And you say that for 15 years you've argued that Canada treats infrastructure like a political prop instead of the economy's operating system. Really? A prop?
Yes. We started looking at these issues back in 2008 and 9. And we performed work in 2010, which essentially predicted what's happening today. We've been speaking to government, policymakers, but, the problem is infrastructure in this country is so politicized. We can talk more about what that means, but we don't treat infrastructure seriously. And the housing crisis that we have right now is actually a direct symptom of the fact that we don't treat infrastructure seriously in this country.
How do we not treat it seriously? We have this major projects office. We have, we were started by an infrastructure plan to build the railway across the country. We've got LRTs being built in Toronto. We've got subway expansions being built in Toronto. How do we not treat it seriously?
Yeah, when I say treat it seriously, I'm talking more at the federal government and provincial government levels. Infrastructure is it's a political football. It's an announcement theatre. Essentially, infrastructure trading is treated as a politically aligned announcements. They're not necessarily fundamental infrastructure requirements that we need. For example, when we look at the uncertainty around infrastructure funding in this country, we're actually 2 times worse than Mexico.
2 times worse than Mexico?
2 times worse than Mexico. And on average, we're almost 4 times worse than our peers in Australia or the UK.
Hold it. In what? In spending, in productivity, in time delays? What? How are we worse?
Yes, spending for sure, but it's the announcement cycle that it's so politicized that you get an announcement, and then a couple of years later, that announcement goes away, and they're on to something else, and then on to something else, and then on to something else. Just visualize for a second that it's kind of like a big roller coaster, because there's no national plan, there's no certainty of where we're headed as a country from an infrastructure point of view. And yes, municipalities and, here in Ontario, they are delivering transit. They are doing some good infrastructure, but infrastructure is a very large conversation. Water and wastewater, it's about coordination between different levels of government. And that's not happening. And our productivity over the last 30 years has suffered because of ultimately we don't have long-term planning in this country, particularly when it comes around infrastructure. And infrastructure is important because it's the very surface that we live, work, and play on. Without it, we can't grow.
The implication of what you're talking about is pretty profound. And I'm quoting from what your organization sent me. In 2010, you warned that we drift toward 1% real growth to 2060 if we stuck with stop-start, politicized spending and weak evaluation. By 2021, the OECD was projecting that we would have the slowest per capita growth in the OECD. Exactly the risk that you flagged. So we're not in good shape.
Correct. No, we're not in good shape. And the problem with infrastructure, it takes a 15-year view in order to be able to get it right. And, when we're talking housing crisis, or we're talking congestion, or we're talking higher taxes, these are all ultimately symptoms of the fact that we haven't planned our communities and infrastructure spend, and we have not delivered that to the private industry so that they could spend the next 10 to 15 years putting their capital at risk and training people for the infrastructure that is planned to be built. We're one of the few OECD countries that does not have a national plan. And therefore, we're suffering the issues of the fact that we're not coordinated, and infrastructure, unfortunately, has been used as political football.
And then you've described it. I love this word, and I need you to explain it better if you could. You say that that's led to a situation where we have Ponzinomics, a la Canadian style, where we build a national infrastructure strategy with a public ledger and pipeline and tie money to milestones, choose what we don't do is build a national infrastructure strategy with a public ledger and pipeline and tie money to milestones, choose wisely, fund predictably, maintain relentlessly, and measure transparently. So obviously you must think that today we don't fund predictably, we don't maintain relentlessly, and we don't measure transparently. And that's led to something you call Ponzinomics?
Yeah, Ponzinomics is it's slightly independent to the conversation about infrastructure that we're having, but Ponzinomics is it's something that we here at the CanCEA, the Canadian Centre for Economics, we're shocked with, particularly in the last decade. And if you have a moment, I'll briefly explain what Ponzinomics is.
Please.
Okay, so just imagine that you're paying a worker $1,000 to dig a hole in the ground, and you pay another worker to fill that hole exactly back to its original state. Now, nothing's happened, right? Now, if industry did that activity, then industry would lose $2,000. It paid $1,000 to dig a hole, $1,000 to fill it back in, and there's zero productivity according to economic accounting. However, if government had paid for that, it's added $2,000 to GDP. Productivity is $1,000 per hour, and politicians will say, "Hey, stronger, game changer," and then it gets worse because they will try and book that activity as capital investments as if it looks like it's infrastructure, but it's not. And it's even worse when governments, and particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, it's even worse when they borrow against it because they can keep then doing it again and again and again, and they're pushing the problem to the next generation without actually having anything to show for it. So that's Ponzinomics. It's basically keeping people busy, but not actually productively adding to the ability of the system to sustain itself and to actually grow prosperity. Sorry.
So you think that rather than focus on growth, on prosperity, we've just been trying to keep people busy?
Yeah, look, it's the sad fact, from my opinion, is we live in a highly politicized country. You hear the media talking about other countries and everything else, but this country is highly politicized. We really do lack proper evaluation and proper business cases. And essentially, this country has been fixated on just basically paying people money and using infrastructure as social programs, as opposed to what they should be, is building the infrastructure and the means for the country to actually take risk, innovate, get to work, and be prosperous on its own. And yet, every time there's a problem, people say government should do X, Y, Z. And the problem with Ponzinomics is there's nothing to show for all this money that has been spent.
This is going to be a fascinating conversation tonight, everybody. We're going to take a break and come back. I'm going to ask our guest, Paul, what this has cost us. And then we're going to talk about what the potential solutions are. Stay with us, everyone. This is going to be, I think, a really interesting conversation to sort of set the policy agenda. We got Mark Carney going to the United States and talking to Donald Trump about the economy. We've got this major projects office. We've got national infrastructure. We've got a housing strategy. Maybe they should be listening to Paul a little bit more than they are. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
There you go.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got Paul Smetanin with us today. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. It is a socioeconomic simulation platform. They track 4,000 different topics. And he has just described to us something that he calls Ponzinomics. And he thinks that we're overly political in Canada in regards to deciding what to do and our policies, and that's part of the problem, and that it's led to some challenges. And we're going to run through some of those challenges because you've got a pretty blunt diagnosis in your assessment here. You've talked about we're stuck in announcement theater. We indulge in these fuzzy economics, and you think that we've therefore invested chronically less in infrastructure than we need to, that we've got funding that's less than our peers, that we invest less in productivity, that our housing is a real challenge, that taxed at rates significantly above our peers. Tell us all a little bit, if you could, about the impact of this Ponzinomics, about this lack of coherent strategy.
Sure. So 15 years ago, we'd written a report, and essentially we identified that infrastructure should be like proper infrastructure. We're talking water, wastewater, freeways, transit, should be 60% higher than what it was. And infrastructure also needs to be maintained, and that should have been over 80% higher because we don't maintain infrastructure particularly well in this country. But ignoring infrastructure and not having a long-term plan does a couple of things. Firstly, it takes away your ability to become more productive, to do more with the same amount of resources or do more with less. Secondly, industry can't plan to put their private capital at risk because they don't know what the plan is. It's a roller coaster. And therefore, they don't upskill or invest in upskilling or skilling the labour force of the future. What does it cost us? Over the past 15 years, the uncertainty in infrastructure, as I mentioned, it's 2 times worse in Mexico. Uncertainty being stop, start, there's no coordination. Over the last 15 years, it's cost us $600 billion, right? That's almost 40% of the current value of the economy. And the delays that have been occurring, you could take a $200 billion investment in infrastructure, and if you delay it, you're actually ripping out about $144 billion of its benefits.
I gotta interrupt you. I apologize. Mexico. I don't think many Canadians think that Mexico is this, this example of incredible, great governance that's non-politicized and is investing in spectacular infrastructure. How have you assessed that we are, what is it, 2 times worse than Mexico?
Yes, so if you have a look at the accounts here and what infrastructure announcements are made and where they go and where they end up and do they get finished and are they delayed, and then you look at OECD countries, including Mexico, and then you basically see that we are twice as worse when you look at the uncertainty, right? The variability. It's like think of uncertainty as I say yes on a Monday and a no on a Tuesday, right? And yeah, we're twice as worse as Mexico right now. Mexico is investing in infrastructure. It has to. It's growing, but they have a national plan. We don't.
Some people think that the problem is our approval system, that we've got an overly complicated approval system that needs every indigenous group to agree, every province to agree, every community to agree, and that approval. And some people called this bill that was passed by the prior Trudeau government the "Don't Build New Pipelines Anywhere Ever Forever" bill. Is it the approval process that's the problem? Other people have said we've got a procurement problem that's the issue, that we always have to go with the lowest bid, and we segment out the contracts into pieces, and then the pieces don't add up together, and we have no one sort of overseen. And that's what the Eglinton LRT has been. It's the procurement problem has been used as the problem. You're talking about it's just a national plan. So what's the problem? Why do we do infrastructure so poorly relative to what we could and should and other people do?
Well, when you study other countries like Australia or the UK, they actually have an infrastructure pipeline and ledger. For example, in Australia or the UK exactly what's being built, where it's built, why it's being built, and how it's actually going to benefit the economy and the well-being of their citizens. We don't have that ledger. The PDO came out the other day and basically said, the government's going to spend, $156 billion on infrastructure, but we're not sure on what, because we don't have the data or the information. Infrastructure and the issues across this country are complex, and there's no silver bullet. But right now, housing is in crisis. It's a direct symptom of what we're talking about now. And the fact that in Ontario, housing is taxed twice as much as anything else in the economy is another symptom of, by virtue of the fact that we've not treated infrastructure properly for the last 30 years.
How is housing taxed twice as much as anything else in the economy?
Well, it is. And primarily through development charges, sales tax, and land transfer taxes. So a new home that's produced in Ontario has on average 36% of that new home, if it's $1 million, $360,000 of that $1 million is taxation. In the rest of the economy, it would be about 160,000, 170,000. Why are homes being taxed aggressively? Because people need homes and you can't avoid the tax. That is a sad predicament of the situation that we're in, that each time there's an issue, for instance, congestion here in Toronto, we came out with that report, and now they're talking about putting a building charge on homes in Toronto to somehow deal with congestion. I find it a little offensive that because we have a breakdown in governance, right, the go-to in this country is tax, more fees, more charges.
So building starts are at an all-time low, probably a 30-year low. The condo market,
which we knew exactly 3 years ago would happen.
The condo market is in an ice age. Single family dwelling unit building is similarly anemic.
Right.
We supposedly need 3.5 million homes in the Greater Toronto Area or Southern Ontario, and building starts at an all-time low.
Just on that point, Brian, every announcement that a politician's made about housing has almost a near zero probability of occurring. We've done the math. That's what that simulation platform's about. We do a lot of work for CMHC, but it's ultimately because they're out of touch with the infrastructure required to put a house on a street that has electricity and water and wastewater and everything else. All these grand statements is an example of the politicization and announcement theatre of the country that we live in.
But Paul, in 2022, the Ford government came out with a housing affordability task force with 57 recommendations of what to do. It's 3 years later, 3 and a bit years later.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
come, how come nothing's happened?
It's a great Canadian tradition to have more meetings, have more recommendations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, and I can describe the difference between, say, Australia and Canada. But unfortunately, in this country, we have so many levels of government. We do have a Byzantine system of rules and everything else, which is fine because I live in this country. I'm a citizen here because of the fact that we care about, the person next to us. The problem is, though, that we aren't all on the same team. And we haven't been, certainly since I've arrived, 25 years ago. And something needs to break before the country starts to understand how deep the issues run. And we're moving towards that break.
You also, I think, really lead to sort of an intergenerational inequity argument. What you sent me was that you say that a 20-year-old faces a lifetime productivity bill measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars because we didn't build when it counted.
Correct.
So because my generation messed up, my kids are going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars less well off. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, because infrastructure supports the ability of a person to get out and work and to be productive. If the infrastructure is not there, the person has less opportunity and therefore they, earn less wage in their lifetime. And on average, and this is back to 2010 again, on average, I think, forget the number, but it's about, the day that a person in this country, 20 years old, starts their job, they're almost like given a bill by saying that, by the time you get to retirement, in today's dollars, you're going to be $300,000, poorer, because that's what they're missing out on as the opportunity cost. And so that metric and statistic, we designed that and wanted to calculate it to make it real to normal people on the ground that this is costing generations behind us. And we've got a lot of debt now that they will pay, we won't, but we've got nothing to show for it. And that leads us back to the politicization of this country and the fact that big infrastructure projects are their announcements. They're politically motivated for sure. And they're also a good way, unfortunately, to transfer money from government to private interests.
Paul, you've been talking about this, you say, for more than 15 years. Is anyone listening?
People listen. The problem is that no one's really responsible because you've just got this fracturing. The feds are, aren't locked into what the provinces are doing and vice versa. And then you've got the municipalities. I feel bad for the municipalities because all the problems get pushed down on the municipalities and they don't have the funding to deliver infrastructure that the feds used to build. And in fact, the feds are the biggest beneficiary from what municipalities do in infrastructure, and yet they won't show up to fund infrastructure. And that's a problem. And that's why you've now got a situation where housing is taxed 2 times more than the rest of anything else in the economy, because the municipalities have gone down that path of having to charge development charges, for example, because the provincial and federal levels of government are not funding them correctly or according to their responsibilities.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes. I'm going to ask our guest, Paul, what's the solution? How do we change things? If people are listening but not responding and not doing anything about it, how come? Because clearly we've got some major issues here that he's outlined, and I think we all sort of feel it. I think we realize that the housing business is cataclysmic right now. We see the delays on the Eglinton LRT. We wonder about why we're not building the pipelines that we should be building, liquefied natural gas plants, etc. But what's the solution, and how do we get something done? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes, talking about Ponzinomics, talking about politicization, and how we solve it to build the kind of country we want to build. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Paul Smetanin with us today. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. It's a socioeconomic simulation platform. He tracks 4,000 different topics, and he says we're not working. We got a big problem in Canada. We've got political fracture. We got Ponzinomics. We got political theater. We got announcement theater. We got real problems. So, Paul, how do we stop announcement theater?
Well, it begins measuring things properly and accounting for things, because what we've got to do is take the hiding places away from people who do the announcement theatre, but there's no one in the room saying, well, hang on, that's just announcement theatre. I'll give you a good example. Just prior to the election, the previous Prime Minister made an announcement about a very large infrastructure project that we believe does not have a business case at all. We've also estimated that that's going to cost Ontario about $50 billion over the next 20 years, that announcement on its own, where that could actually go to water and wastewater and building out and supporting, the very sort of landscape that we need to build housing. So how do we...
Sorry, what was that announcement that had no business case?
I'm not going there, but there was a very large announcement, and anyone with an internet connection can look at what Trudeau announced just prior to the election.
High-speed rail?
Something like that. So moving in terms of how do we fix this, like we're not evaluating things properly, and governments like that, politicians like that, because it creates a hiding place, right? You don't have someone in the room that says, hang on, how's this affecting the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why? None of that has occurred. And I won't get too technical, but this country is living off what's called input-output models that can't tell the difference of if you're spending money on ice cream or you're spending money on infrastructure. But people who don't want to alight, shone on what's going on, they prefer input-output models.
So our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has talked about separating out the budget into operating expenses versus capital expenses, which is what companies do. They'll account for capital, separately. Is that a positive move? You've argued for a 5-year build plan. So is a 5-year build plan comparable to what Carney's talking about?
Sorry, let's get back to the operating versus capital and splitting. That scares me because it's another accounting game, just like Ponzinomics. Splitting operating and capital is not about addressing the issue. It's about actually changing the optics of a very bad situation. And what gets booked at capital was the example I gave you previously. Dig a hole, fill it back in, call it capital. That's great, right? But it's not. We don't have measurement systems. We don't have a ledger, or we don't treat infrastructure as if it's the operating system of the country. I understand why the current Prime Minister wants to go in the direction of operating versus capital, because it's going to make it a lot easier to change the optics, right? Because all we see right now is a lot of debt and nothing really on the ground has happened. Where did the money go? So, like I said earlier this year, the announcement, it doesn't have a business case, and yet, we're going to be getting into something that's $70 to $100 billion that has a 1 in 500 chance of actually achieving what the politicians are telling us. And that's not our statistic. That's from Oxford University on all those kinds of projects around the world. So, if we want to lean in and ask the question of what's it going to take to get things fixed, my earlier point was, I don't think there's too many actors in the system that are benefiting or somehow getting what they need at the behest of productivity and the quality of life of Canadians. And therefore, nature tells us the only way that changes is when something breaks existentially, right? I can explain what that is through an analogy, if you like.
Please.
Something breaks. So healthcare system in this country. Canadians are very proud of their healthcare system until they're in it. And then they see the issues in the healthcare system and the bureaucracies and nothing sort of really coordinating. However, if you have a pandemic, like a very serious pandemic, and I'm not talking about the last one, the healthcare system changes very quickly, right? It transcends the politics, right? It starts breaking through barriers because it's triage. There's an emergency and you've got to fix it quick. So get out of the way. Infrastructure and what will change in this country, it will have that breaking point. And we're seeing it. We're experiencing it, right? And that breaking point, and with the federal government pouring so much immigration on an already bad situation, is just exacerbating our move towards this particular breaking point.
So some of the things that you've recommended are one public ledger, a single website that shows every quarter what was promised, what's been approved, what's under contract, and what's actually been.
Yeah, we need transparency.
Number two, you've set a 5-year build plan that everyone can count on. That's got a pipeline of not just what's done, but what we need in workers' training materials, so that companies and labor can plan for that.
Right. Well, exactly. It's and in fact, we're just about to do. We're in the midst of a study right now, looking at the infrastructure needs of every municipality in Ontario. And next year, and we're evaluating that if we don't do this, what economics is at risk and what people's well-being is at risk. And we will be demonstrating for the first time in this country what proper infrastructure accounting and line of sight to why we're doing it, right? We've got to know our why we're doing things and how does it support the system. And we're hoping that study gets to the Prime Minister's desk. In fact, the way we're going to do that study, it should lead to his desk, because, we're familiar with the current Prime Minister. I came from banking and finance. I've met him a couple of times. But we're hoping that we can generate the example in this country that this is what it looks like. And let's do it. Like, let's get serious about this, because housing crisis is not going away. Congestion, we did that congestion study, and we were able to do the math on how that's affecting people's quality of life.
You talk about, as we just mentioned, this, single website public ledger. You've talked about a 5-year build plan. You've also talked about things that in business would happen just, automatically. You've talked about a single space where you can go and see a dashboard of what's going on and track the milestones and how we're progressing. And then you've talked about something that I thought we had. You said stable multi-year funding. Don't we have stable multi-year funding? Like, if we're going to build an LRT, if we're going to build a subway, if we're going to build a highway, if we're going to build a pipeline, don't we have stable multi-year funding?
No, not from a wholesale system point of view. We've got funding for projects. Everything's done project by project. There isn't a pool of funds that is stable at the top. Everything, as I've mentioned, is assigned for political announcement. It's project by project. And even the funding of, say, the projects that you just mentioned, they're not funded correctly. Like, they're funded to be built, but they're not funded to be operated.
And then they go to Mississauga or Toronto and say, we'll build it, but then you got to figure out how to fund the operations and the repair and maintenance.
Right. Which leads to more taxes and charges on the household. And we already live in a country that is excruciatingly taxed at the household level. And so, again, you need stability and safety. I say stability and safety. I use the word safety in that we've got to be able to trust our politicians and good governance in this country.
So the federal government has announced this. I can't remember what the name of it is, but a process to get things approved far quicker.
That worries me.
Okay, well, let's come back to that in a second. So number one, get approvals more quickly. Number two, this major projects office, which has someone that's got a reasonable amount of private sector and public sector experience in Calgary running this major projects office. And number three, even last week, they announced a new system for procurement within the Defense Department to make sure that we get procurement done. So is not our government doing things right? You say you're worried. Why are you worried when they're trying to improve the whole process?
Okay, so first point, faster approvals. What are we approving? That's the question. What are we approving? What are we speeding up the approval of? That's the problem. We don't know a line of sight on why we're doing things. And what you've just described is announcement, 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 announcement. We'll see if anything changes. I doubt it because these are piecemeal announcements. There's nothing strategically systemic about it. And that's the federal government saying it. Well, guess what? Everything happens in provinces and municipalities in this country. So all the announcing and everything else at the top, I'm not buying it.
What about this major projects office and the Defense Department
The
centralized procurement department?
Yeah, the federal government has not been able to evaluate infrastructure whatsoever to this day. They do not have the means to tell the difference of, as I said, should we pave roads with asphalt or pave roads with ice cream? The methods they're using would actually, believe it or not, choose ice cream from an economic point of view. So they don't have the ability to evaluate.
Because what, we're doing everything based on cost, not quality, not long-term viability?
No, I'm not saying everything is an extreme statement because at least, about 60% of what's going on in the country around infrastructure is actually good infrastructure. I'm talking about the 40%, and it's the 40% that's actually really hurting Canadians, particularly over the last 30 years. Canadians are asking questions. It's like, why do we have a housing crisis? Why do we have to live in congestion? Why is our standard of living dropped? And why is the OECD telling us that we're going to be the worst performing country over the next 40 years?
This is incredible.
Right? These are the effects of what we're talking about.
If you sat down with our Prime Minister, what would you tell him?
Well, I'd start by evaluation and measurement and bookkeeping and proper accounting, because you can't have a conversation until you at least measure things.
But that's the boring stuff. The exciting stuff is the announcements.
I know, and that's why everyone is a dopamine hit all about announcements. And yes, what I'm talking about is rather dry and boring, but it's necessary. But on top of that, and I think that this particular Prime Minister gets it. I just don't think that given the system that he's dropped into is necessarily going to allow him to be Mark Carney. We need to act like a country, right? We need to see the money. It's got to be stable, safe, and not hijacked around electioneering and announcements. And then we deliver. Right, we've got to start showing value for money in this country through good governance. Stability beats slogans, right? We need to be, we have to have a long-term view around this topic. Otherwise, it's just going to be the gift that keeps on giving to the current generation because nothing can get done. So yeah, own a new home. Own a home in 2028, 29, your home's going to be worth a lot more because we can't build things. Again, it takes, and a lot of what I'm talking about can actually occur in terms of the measurement to manage, can occur over the next couple of years. In fact, we're doing it in Prince Edward Island. We've got the entire government on a modern simulation platform where everyone is looking at the same thing and they're agreeing to, what needs to get done and how to evaluate it.
So infrastructure.
At the moment, we've got people just talking past people.
So Infrastructure Ontario was established, I don't know, during the McGuinty time period, I believe.
Yep.
Its intention to do exactly what you're talking about and
No,
centralize
no.
all
Infrastructure
infrastructure.
Ontario was basically put together so it can execute the funding and the contract side of infrastructure. It doesn't do evaluation. Infrastructure Ontario is 90% lawyers.
90% lawyers. But the idea was to centralize it all because the lawyers could do a better job than having it being politically
Well, but
spread out amongst different ministries.
we're not talking about infrastructure planning. We're talking about, oh, okay, an announcement's been made, so let's go on paper it. That's Infrastructure Ontario, right? There's no one in the room that's actually doing the work to understand how it all fits in, right? Think of infrastructure as a Rubik's Cube problem. Everyone looking at their different sides of their discipline and water, wastewater, and roads and everything else, they're all trying to solve their side of the cube. But the problem is you can't solve a Rubik's Cube one side at a time. So they're all bumping into each other because they don't have line of sight. Roads doesn't have line of sight on water and wastewater or education or healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no one really doing this. So it becomes piecemeal.
So let's talk about, transit in the Greater Toronto Area. We had John Tory talking about smart, what was it? Smart transit or smart trains.
Sure.
Then we had, actually before that, we had David Miller talking about LRTs on almost every road. Then we had Premier Ford coming in and changed all of that with the Ontario line. One would think that
you've
there's
just made my point. Welcome to 2 times worse than Mexico.
But like thinking about transit in the Greater Toronto Area, one would think that there's smart people at the TTC or Metrolinx or the Ontario government that actually can figure out what the right thing is to do and to plan it over time. How come every single different premier or mayor comes up with a different strategy?
100%. I've lectured at U of T at civil engineering, and you've got Professor Eric Miller over there who does the evaluations incredibly, like he's world renowned, but no one's listening. Politicians, and they will look at their constituency and their values at a point in time, and they'll make announcements. And that's my point. Announcements are too politicized. Announcements aren't strategic. In the way this country works at the moment, it's very short term, 12 months, 18 months. It's not longer term in terms of, we need to do this, and sorry, it's going to cost money. It's going to be boring for the next 10 years, but it will begin to help us solve the housing problem. We're not set up this way at the moment anymore. Australia is, the UK is, the Americans less so, but they're still, the Americans are pretty good at measuring things. But yeah, we don't have this strategic alignment, which is unfortunate, and it's costing our children.
Just remembering some of the names, I think we had Transit City, then we had Places to Grow, then we had Smart, then we had the Big Move, and then we had the Ontario line.
And a lot of these announcements, and you have associations and the talking heads in the system. They're all communications people, right? Ex-journalists, communications people. They're not in the system, right? And again, that's part of the challenge, that we're baked into a political cycle.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments about what the heck is the solution to this problem with our guest in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.
Yep.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got Paul Smetanin with us tonight. Sounds like you've got a fascinating career. Tell us the name of the organization that you lead, and if people are interested in, hearing what you got to say, is there a website they should go to?
Sure. It's the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. We are a consulting firm, and we provide technology to measure things like the topics that we're talking about. And our website is www.cancea.ca.
Really,
or join me on LinkedIn. I write about this at least weekly.
At least weekly. I've enjoyed reading your posts, so thank you for that. You've said that we need to act like a country. that we need to move from theater to test. We need to move from headlines to outcomes. We need to move from churn to confidence. Nice
Yes.
words. How do we do that?
Well, again, this is rhetorical, but we need to act like a country. And the recent trade war and the geopolitical pressures that we're feeling from the outside is starting to test that. And thankfully, we're starting to move in the right direction. But act like a country. Stop the accounting games of Ponzinomics and the illusion that activity equals value. Secondly, like, let's see the money, make it stable, make it safe, and then deliver against it. One ledger or an accounting system of measurement, show citizens dashboards, the 5-year pipeline. Like, if we can't explain who benefits and over what horizon and at what risk, then the project isn't ready from our point of view. Thirdly, stability beats slogans. Make role-aligned, multi-year compacts with the norm so that we're enabling infrastructure that arrives on time. And private markets, we need to scale. We need to get private industry involved and have them put their neck out rather than, relying upon governments trying to pick winners. And lastly, it's performance, not presses or press releases. Let's start tying dollars down to milestones and outcomes and reward early delivery and claw back underperformance. And like I said, it's easy to say in the current environment we're in, it's going to be damn hard to do. But it takes, it's not a popular thing for myself as a business founder and a policy analyst to be actually saying things like this publicly, but we've been watching this for too long and we really are in a crisis, and we're a little tired about the talking heads talking past each other and getting back to that idea that activity is value. No, the activity that we're embarked upon is not productive, and we're not really getting serious about things, and I think that we can do better.
I think we've got to do a lot better. And I think we are in a crisis. I think you're right in that regard. Numerous people have talked about how our productivity is 40% of what productivity is in the United States today. And 10, 12 years ago, we were equal. How we haven't had real growth in median incomes in 15 years. Right. How we are becoming more unequal in our economic system today. How we are putting on our kids not only the debt that we talked about, but housing economics that will mean that they never can have the dream of home ownership because housing prices are 12 to 15% of income versus 8%, 12 to 15 times income in Canada versus 6 to 8 times in the United States. So about twice as expensive relative to income in Canada that it is in the United States, and versus 3 to 5 times when it was 50 years ago. That we're building the same number of houses today in Canada that we were building in the 1970s, and the population has increased dramatically. But you add on to that climate change, infrastructure deficit that you've talked about, the issue in regards to AI and how that's going to change our world. I think that our kids today have got a real issue, and we haven't even talked about the healthcare system that may be underfunded. We haven't talked about pensions. We haven't talked about long-term care. I think our kids have got some real challenges, and I think our number one job is to leave a better world for our kids. And I don't think we're doing that today. So I think we failed. And so I think, Paul, a bunch of your recommendations are things that governments have got to pay attention to. I remember I was at dinner one time with my kids and I told them that I was excited about infrastructure. And they said, Dad, no one's excited about infrastructure. But I think the way you described it is really helpful. Right on the top, you said that infrastructure is like our national operating system. And if we think about it that way, from a computer standpoint, that the infrastructure that the government lays down is the operating system that the rest of us gets to make use of to enjoy building homes, building businesses, building an economy, building a life on. You got to have a good operating system. And I worry that right now it's not working, and we got to us. We got to hit reset. We may have to turn it on and turn it off to see if we can get something better working again. So, Paul, I really appreciate you joining us today and challenging us with the problems and exciting us about the future, even if it's a little bit boring in some of the things that we got to do to implement it. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, nicely put, Brian, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you and your audience about these important issues.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Mark Carney's in Washington, and it's going to get a bunch of press, and personal relationships are important, but I think that he's got to have the plan behind him that Paul's talking about what we're actually going to do. And we can't let this strategy of chaos and political announcements govern our lives and our country and our planning. And we need to have that kind of planning that Paul's talking about. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on my YouTube channel, on podcast servers, as soon as the radio show goes broadcast to air. Thanks for joining. Good night, everybody.